Hello Peter, I'm Doug.
Hello, Doug.
Pleased to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Peter, when and where were you born?
1925.
Peter, can you tell us a little bit about your family, the family that you were born into? What was it like?
My parents were both Yorkshire, came from Middlesbrough,
Right.
and they moved to Birmingham about 1920. I had a brother, but he was 16 years older than me. So he was more or less leaving home
Yes.
by the time I realised what was happening.
What was your father's occupation?
When I was born, he was an iron and steel agent, self-employed in Birmingham. He'd originally been a blast furnace manager in Skinning Grove, off the on the Yorkshire coast, and then moved to Walsall just before the First World War. After the First World War, he started up on his own.
Where did you go to school?
I first went to Hall Green School, walking there half a mile 4 times a day. And then I went to Camp Hill Grammar School in Birmingham.
What was it like at Camp Hill in those days?
It's difficult to answer that, really. I don't think it was the right school for me. I was more mathematically minded than grammar minded. And I think I went downhill all the time I was there. But nevertheless, I got through it.
Do you remember the start of the Second World War?
Oh yes, very well. In fact, it started, as far as I was concerned, on the 1st of September, not the 3rd of September, because that was the day we were evacuated. We went to Warwick, and because I was in the 5th form, one of the older boys, I was one of 50 who were billeted in Warwick Castle. So I can boast that I used to live in a castle. I was only there a short time, till nearly Christmas in 1939. And then for various reasons I went home, and the school started to work jointly with Moseley Grammar School, and we shared Moseley for 6 months.
When you left school at 16, what was your job?
I went to work in Birmingham Gas Department, their industrial research laboratories. It may sound a bit technical, but they did quite a lot of heat treatment for various companies in the Birmingham area. And also they would test materials for these companies as well. And I worked on the side mostly that was testing materials for hardness and strength.
What was life like in Birmingham during the bombing? Were you there when the bombing was taking place?
Oh yes, I was. In fact, when it first started, I was trying to swap for my school certificate, and I can remember sitting under the stairs with my parents during air raids, trying to swat up some of the subjects for the exam the next day. Once I'd passed the exam, I spent the next year at school in the 6th form, and that meant from July to the following April, I think, was the last air raid we had in Birmingham. And we had several bad ones around about the time Coventry was bombed as well. I suppose the most interesting thing as far as that's concerned is I managed to arrive at school one day, I think it was about December the 11th, after a raid on the 10th, and I arrived, I think, about 10:30 after the buses had managed to go round the Wrekin to get there.
Yeah.
And I'd managed to get on one eventually,
Right.
to find that a landmine or what we called a landmine, which was actually a sea mine on a parachute, detonated on the railway yard on the opposite side of Stratford Road to the school. I was the first boy to arrive at 10:30,
Right.
and I was immediately given a broom and put into the girls' school to sweep up the broken glass and water in the hall,
Right.
which was coming from the broken central heating. The school was absolutely wrecked as far as that was concerned, so we couldn't go back to Camp Hill. And when I finished the year, going to the Moseley and Borsall Heath Institute, we had a class there. And then I left in the July.
When did you decide to go into the Navy?
I was actually an air raid precaution, ARP messenger,
Right.
working for the local headquarters in Hall Green, which was run by the geography master from Camp Hill. And he said, I know you want to go in the Navy. Have you seen they're starting a university short course for prospective naval officers? Would you fancy going on it? And this suited me down to the ground, and I applied. And after an interview in medical, I was accepted and went to Liverpool University for 6 months.
When you finished your training, what happened to you then?
I then went into a naval training ship, HMS Ganges at Shotley
Right.
on the east coast. And after about 6 or 8 weeks training, we were sent to have some sea training in a ship. I was actually sent down to Plymouth to join HMS Sheffield, which has pleased me very much because it was a very famous ship. But when we got to Plymouth, we found she was out on a cruise in the Bay of Biscay, and we spent 10 days in Devonport Barracks. It's not a place I can recommend.
No.
We used to reckon there were more criminals in the barracks there than there were in Dartmoor up the road. When she returned, we joined Sheffield, and 2 days after, we were put ashore again because she was being sent out to the Mediterranean to bombard at Salerno. And we were put aboard HMS Bermuda, which was in the dockyard in Plymouth for 2 days.
Right.
And then, after a train journey, which started at 11 o'clock at night, to go to London, we then caught the 10:30 the following morning to Thurso,
Right.
in the north of Scotland,
Yeah.
and arrived there at 7 o'clock the following morning. So that was quite a long train journey. We then went across to Scapa Flow, where I joined HMS Norfolk.
Right.
I did my sea training with her.
How long did you stay on HMS Norfolk for?
I then went into a naval training ship, HMS Ganges at Shotley
Right.
on the east coast. And after about 6 or 8 weeks training, we were sent to have some sea training in a ship. I was actually sent down to Plymouth to join HMS Sheffield, which has pleased me very much because it was a very famous ship. But when we got to Plymouth, we found she was out on a cruise in the Bay of Biscay, and we spent 10 days in Devonport Barracks. It's not a place I can recommend.
No.
We used to reckon there were more criminals in the barracks there than there were in Dartmoor up the road. When she returned, we joined Sheffield, and 2 days after we were put ashore again because she was being sent out to the Mediterranean to bombard at Salerno. And we were put aboard HMS Bermuda, which was in the dockyard in Plymouth for 2 days.
Right.
And then after a train journey which started at 11 o'clock at night to go to London, we then caught the 10:30 the following morning to Thurso,
Right.
in the north of Scotland,
Yeah.
and arrived there at 7 o'clock the following morning. So that was quite a long train journey. We then went across to Scapa Flow, where I joined HMS Norfolk
Right.
and did my sea training with her.
How long did you stay on HMS Norfolk for?
About 8 or 10 weeks, I can't remember exactly, but I left her on November the 10th, or was it the 11th,
Right.
in 1943.
Right.
We'd just come back from escorting a convoy back from Murmansk.
Right.
It was the first convoy to come back at the end of end of 1943.
Right.
And after I left Norfolk, she was doing very much the same thing, covering a convoy when the Tirpitz came out.
Right. What did officer training involve?
It covered a lot of courses on navigation, signalling, and ship handling, and various things like that. And eventually we took exams to see whether we passed. Children would be rather interested in the exams, I think. The pass mark on every subject was 75%,
Right.
except one, which was 90%, and that was signalling.
Right. Yes. So we're now into 1944, and you're in Hove. What happened next?
The important date was February the 10th, which was when I got my commission. And those of us who'd passed went to collect our officers' uniforms. Those who hadn't went straight back to Portsmouth.
Right.
I did another fortnight at King Alfred at Hove, and then a fortnight at the naval establishment at Greenwich, which was rather a treat to be eating meals
Yes.
in the painted hall. After that, I went straight up to Fort William, to the Coastal Forces training course.
Obviously 1944 was a crucial year. So you were a midshipman. 1944, we've got the invasion of Europe called D-Day. Did you play any part in that?
Yes, I started my life in Coastal Forces, having passed through the training ship, was sent to New Haven in the middle of May, and I was put aboard the 61st RML flotilla as a spare officer. The RMLs were rescue motor launches, and we were doing air-sea rescue in cooperation with the Air Force air-sea rescue.
Right.
I think probably we were a jolly good adjunct to them, because our boats could keep the sea rather better than the RAF high-speed launches.
Yes.
And I was in RML 518 on D-Day.
Were you involved in any rescues?
No, I wasn't in. We never had a pickup in any of the boats I was in, but I was involved in quite a number of crash calls.
Right.
And one of the most interesting ones, I suppose, was on D-1, and I was in RML 495, assisting the First Lieutenant who was deputising for the skipper, who was ashore at that time.
Right.
We got a crash call over by Dieppe, and we went across to Dieppe. The weather was absolutely diabolical. If there was anybody in a dinghy there, they didn't stand a chance. And we searched for quite some time. We saw a walrus searching as well. The walrus is a supermarine flying boat.
Right.
And eventually we gave up and came back. Rather interesting, we had a crew of 20. We were carrying an American Air Force doctor, all ready for D-Day,
Right.
when we were expecting to be picking them up by the hundreds. And on that trip, he spent the whole day in this bunk, and he and I were the only ones who weren't sick of the whole crew.
Right.
On the way back, I was on the bridge. There was a man on the wheel, and every so often he'd say, "Can you come and take the wheel, sir? I want to be sick." And I'd take the wheel while he was sick over the side.
Yes.
Came back.
Yes.
I think he deserved a medal.
So I'm fascinated.
And-
Sorry.
Sorry. Eventually, after an awful struggle, we managed to persuade Newhaven to let us back into harbour at about midnight. We knew something must be happening because we saw the odd ships going past with balloons up. Up till then, we'd had the channel absolutely to ourselves.
Right.
When we got back to Newhaven, the whole harbour was deserted. It had been full of motor torpedo boats and landing craft. The only ships that were left were our rescue motor launches. And I transferred from 495 back to 518 and was allowed to sleep till 2 o'clock if I could have slept, apart from the aeroplanes going across all the time. And 2 o'clock we sailed.
Right. And did you know that D-Day was going to happen?
We knew it was close. I suppose the Saturday before was when they closed the dockyard and wouldn't let us out. Luckily, I managed to phone my father just the day before, because his birthday was the 6th of June. And I rang him up to say, "I'm sorry, I shan't be able to ring you on your birthday because I'm due to go to sea that day." That was not because I knew it was D-Day,
No. Yeah.
but because I was due to go anyway.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I felt a bit guilty about that.
What did you do on D-Day itself, the 6th of June?
I suppose we were on our rendezvous in the middle of the channel by about 4 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I remember was I was having my breakfast and we suddenly picked up a great amount of speed, and I dashed up on deck to see what had happened, and a Lightning, one of the twin boom American fighters, P-38 I think it was, had been coming back and dived straight into the sea in front of us.
Right.
All we found was a small piece of wreckage.
Right.
We spent the rest of the day finding bits of Mulberry Harbour floating around,
Right.
which were a great danger to shipping, because I don't know whether you know anything about the Mulberry Harbour, but there were lots of floating gangways to take lorries and things to the shore. And these were made up of sections of, I suppose, about 30 5-foot cube tanks. Sorry about the 5 foot and
That's okay.
no meters. Bolted together. And they'd obviously come adrift from the ships that were towing them.
Right.
They were only, I suppose, about 2 foot above water, and highly dangerous as far as any coastal force craft was concerned, because we were made of wood. Some of the boats would be going around at 40 knots, and that would have done no good to the boats at all. And we had to try and sink them.
Right.
And it was diabolical trying to sink them, because of course we had to puncture every tank,
Okay. Right.
every tank with Oerlikon shells.
Yes.
And we found several of those during D-Day and the next few days. I suppose our biggest find was on D+3 when we found a tank landing craft
Right.
full of very sorry looking soldiers and a couple of tanks. They'd been adrift since D-Day
Right.
with water in their petrol.
Right.
So we towed them for a short way till a tug picked them up.
Could you see any of the action going on the beaches on D-Day itself?
No, in the 6 months I spent at Newhaven and Dover, I never saw the beachhead at all. The only part of the French coast I ever saw was Calais and Boulogne.
Right. What were the main dangers at that time?
While I was doing air sea rescue for about 4 days after D-Day, I don't think we really saw any danger at all. We were watching for aircraft all the time, just in case any of them were German. But I think the only German ones were attacking the beachhead.
Right.
In the middle of the channel, all we saw were thousands of British and American aircraft.
Going over in waves, or just one mass?
Going over in waves, yes. I suppose you'd see fortresses up at high altitude, and the medium-sized bombers at comparatively low altitude, and fighters all over the place.
Tremendous. How did it make you feel?
I don't know. I think I was proud to be taking part in the operation, even if it wasn't very dangerous, and we weren't seeing very much in the way of action. But we were there to do a job if we could.
Of course, it could have all gone horribly wrong, and in which case your role would have been much more crucial in many ways.
Oh yes, it would. In fact, as I said, we were expecting to be picking up lots of ink dinghies.
What happened next after D-Day?
Well, about D+4, I suddenly got a draft aboard to join HMS MTB 697. She was a D-class motor torpedo boat, and her navigator had just been wounded by a British destroyer opening fire on her. He'd been sent ashore. The spare officer had taken over his job as navigator, and I was put aboard as the spare officer.
Right.
And we spent, I suppose, another week or so patrolling out of Newhaven before we were sent round to Dover to work out of Dover, when we used to work patrols just to the south of Boulogne, off Burke, looking for anything heading down for the beachhead, and trying to stop anything going in that direction.
Right. How long did you remain on the motor torpedo boat?
I suppose about 2 months. She was then, in fact the whole flotilla was then paid off to be overhauled before going out to the Mediterranean. She went out to the Mediterranean, but I went back to Newhaven, just as a matter of interest. She was sunk by mine in the Adriatic just before VE Day,
Right.
losing 10 of the crew of 30.
Right. Were these people that you knew? Or?
Yes.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, I met the skipper in Gibraltar towards the end of 1945.
Mm.
And his first words to me were, "I've lost her."
Right.
And he told me all about it.
Mm. What happened? Okay. What happened after you went to New Haven?
I rejoined the 61st RML Flotilla as their spare officer.
Right.
And after a short while, we were sent to Dover. By that time, there were an awful lot of doodlebugs, or V1s as you may know them, going across the channel.
Mm.
And they found that the channel was so short, there wasn't time to vector fighter planes onto the V1s
Mm.
before they got across the channel.
Mm.
And we were fitted with rocket flares and sent to sit on the French coast to fire rocket flares at the doodlebugs when we saw them, hoping that the pilots of the fighters would see that and it would help to guide them onto the V1s.
Right.
Which could be seen, of course, if they were by the flames coming out at the back.
Mm. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the doodlebugs?
I don't think we were very successful with the rockets. We didn't seem to carry on for very long, although by that time the army was beginning to overrun the sites.
Mm.
But it is interesting to, when we were sitting at Dover, we could see the operation of the guns on the cliffs.
Right.
In fact, I should think the road between Dover and Folkestone, there was a gun every few yards all the way along the cliffs there.
Right.
And there was one particular battery which was firing, we thought, rocket-fused shells at the doodlebugs, and you would see them bang, 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 boom.
Mm.
About 5 rounds and they would catch the doodlebug and burn it.
Right.
In fact, as far as those guns were concerned, I can remember going on leave on the bus and going down the hill into Folkestone and seeing a doodlebug hit and diving straight for the town.
Right.
And they got it again on the way down and blew it up.
Right. What did you do after that?
We then went back to New Haven and I carried on doing air sea rescue until the December, when I got a draft to an ASDIC course in Campbelltown.
Right.
I was on that for the first few weeks in 1945,
Right.
and then I was sent out to Freetown in West Africa to join the Coastal Forces motor launches out there.
Right.
They really were doing coastal work,
Right.
from the Gambia all the way around to the Gold Coast and Nigeria. And those were very long trips.
What were you looking for?
The boats had been sent out there to help escort convoys around the coast.
Mm.
By the time I got down there, of course, the war was almost over. In fact, before I knew where I was, VE Day had taken place.
Right.
And we were then expected to be sent out to the Far East.
Mm.
But before we knew where we were, VJ Day took place as well.
Peter, when VE Day occurred, you must have been in West Africa. What was it like?
Funnily enough, I think I was probably more scared on VE Day than at any time. I think everybody was drunk. They were letting off fireworks everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was sitting. Our boat had normally carried 2,000 gallons of petrol. but all the boats on the coast
Yes.
had extra fuel tanks on the upper deck with an extra 3,000 gallons of
Right.
petrol aboard.
Yes.
There'd been two caught fire before I got to Freetown.
Mm.
In fact, a couple of years ago, I believe. And they caught fire, and when they blew up,
Mm.
I understand it took out windows in the hospital 7 miles away.
Wow.
This, of course, wasn't the worst fire.
Mm.
I don't know whether you've heard about the fire in Ostend
No.
in 1940. It was either the end of 44 or 1945,
Right.
when about 10 coastal force boats were sunk
Mm.
after some Canadian D boats caught fire.
Right. Peter, what happened between VE Day and VJ Day, Victory over Japan?
Not a lot. I did one trip up to Bathurst in Gambia,
Mm.
where we did an exercise with the RAF and two corvettes. The RAF was supposed to vector the corvettes onto us, who was supposed to be a submarine.
Right.
It was just an exercise. It's rather interesting that I had my first flight there.
Right.
We managed to scrounge a trip on a Sunderland
Right.
while she was swinging her compass.
Right. What do you mean by swinging the compass?
You have to correct the compass for all different positions that an aircraft or a ship is moving, because of course the magnetic forces in the ship
Mm.
affect the compass on various
Right. And,
different courses.
and what was a Sunderland?
Oh, Sunderland was a 4-engined flying boat.
Mm-hmm. You didn't go to the Far East, so where did you go to?
Well, eventually, after 2 or 3 trips to various places on the coast, I went to Portuguese Guinea,
Mm.
and then we did several trips to Conakry in French Guinea
Right.
to pick up fruit for the local base.
Right.
Nothing else to do, and we came back loaded with fruit, which we managed to scrounge a few bits ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
But it all made for a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
Our final trip was the day before we paid all the MLs off in Freetown.
Mm.
We dumped our depth charges on the way back from Conakry,
Mm.
and the next day the whole of the base went out in all the ships they could find to the 50 fathom line, where we sank the Edinburgh Castle. She was an old liner that had been a base ship out there,
Right.
and they did reckon that she was so rusty
Right.
they couldn't tow her home for a scrap.
Right.
So we all went out to sink her.
Right. And how did you sink her?
Well, we all had to go. I tried firing the Hurricane, which blew up in my face, but eventually 2 frigates sank her.
Mm. You were a midshipman when you became an officer. Did you remain as a midshipman?
No, when I was 19 and a half, in December 1944, I became a sub-lieutenant and was able to have a stripe sewn onto the end of my arm, sleeves.
Mm. Did you have much leave in this time?
While I was at King Alfred under training, I did get the odd weekend at home.
Mm.
But after that, I never got home till the end of December, before I went on the course to Campbelltown.
Mm. How did you get home from Freetown?
That was very interesting, because the odd ship used to call in to pick passengers up
Mm.
if there was any room aboard. in Freetown, but usually there was no room at all. And having paid everything off in Freetown and closing the base down, there were an awful lot of people waiting to get home. And my skipper was put aboard a trawler which was on her way home. I finished up helping a skipper of a boom defence vessel.
Right.
They'd finished their work. The boom had been got rid of, and the two boom defence vessels had to make their way back to the UK. And that's a story in itself.
Can I just take you back? Can you explain what a boom defence vessel was, please?
The boom was a series. It was a net which was laid across the entrance to a harbour to prevent submarines getting inside. And there was a gate in the middle of the net which was manned by boom defence vessels.
Right.
And they would open the gate to let ships in and then close it again. And they had a big sort of crane over their bow to do it.
You're explaining about the boom defence vessel and getting back to England. What was the journey like?
It was long. We did a refit in Dakar for a week. We then sailed and did another week in Las Palmas in Canary Islands.
Right.
People going on holiday there would be very interested. Then there was hardly any traffic in the town at all, and the only way one could move about was either on the local bus or the odd lorry, which could only move along the roads because their tyres were bound up with rags. Spain, of course, was absolutely devastated by their own civil war and had been completely isolated and couldn't get any rubber at all. So they had no tyres. After 10 days in, I think it was about 10 days anyway, in Las Palmas, we sailed for Gibraltar. The coloured stokers aboard the ship had been promised that if they got them as far as Gibraltar, they could go home. And we spent the next 6 weeks stealing stokers off ships coming back from the Far East.
Right.
Poor devils.
Yes.
They'd been going home on nice fast ships.
Yes.
And they got put aboard boom defence vessel.
Right.
And had to wait until we got sufficient to go.
Right.
And the worst thing they found was they had to shovel coal, not oil.
Right. Right.
Eventually, we left Gibraltar in convoy, the two boom defence vessels, a motor fishing vessel, and a whaler. By the time we got opposite Lisbon, the motor fishing vessel had broken down, and so the whaler took her in tow. By the time we got opposite Vigo, we got a gale warning. So the whaler towed the motor fishing vessel into Vigo to leave it there, while we waited at the harbour entrance. When she came back, we went out, and there was, if you know Vigo, it is a large harbour, a grand harbour, and in the entrance there is an island. We went out to the south entrance, turned round and came back in again on the north entrance. And that was the only time I was ever frightened at sea. I saw the whole of our chummy ship's bilge keel roll out of the water. I thought we were both going over. And we spent the next 3 weeks, including Christmas, in Vigo, waiting for the storm to abate.
Right. Yeah. The waves must have been tremendous.
Yes.
How did you celebrate Christmas? Do you remember at all?
Yes.
Mm.
We were treated to a Christmas dinner ashore by a British fund that was set up by local British residents in Spain to look after servicemen who happened to be caught in Spain. And they gave us, all the crew, a dinner. It was rather interesting. I've never had fish for made Christmas dinner before or since. Anyway, by that time, the storm had abated and we got not enough coal to get us back to Plymouth. So we had to go round to Corunna to get some Spanish slack to get us home to Plymouth. When we eventually got home, I rang my people up to say I'm home at last, and they'd been pestering the Admiralty to find out where I was by that time. We then sailed the boom defence vessels round to South Wales, where I left them, went home on leave to wait for my next appointment.
What was your next appointment?
It was my last one, and I was put aboard the reserve fleet in Chatham, where I finished up in charge of a Hunt-class destroyer, HMS Calpe. It's interesting that she was the headquarters ship at the Dieppe attack in 1942. We had about 67 gallons of rum in the rum store.
Right.
And of course every lunchtime I used to have to watch the ration of rum being served out for the crew. And the rum store was a small place about 6 foot by 4 foot, approached by a hatchway, a round hatchway in the deck above. I used to come out feeling quite woozy from the fumes. We had a bottle of 2 pints, 2 tots spare rum in the store. Eventually, a stores petty officer from Chatham came to muster our victualling stores. We checked the pots and pans, then the tin goods, and about 11:30 he said, we'd better check the rum. So we checked the rum. He said, you've got 2 pints, 2 tots spare. You should have to do something about that. And my buffer said, over the side, sir. And I said, yes, and he poured it straight through the porthole. Oh. There'd been more court-martials in the Navy, I think, over rum than anything else. The stores man could easily have dropped us in it. Right. But his face fell like nobody's business.
When did you leave?
In July '46. I then got myself on a course of engineering at Birmingham Central Technical College. Right. And I did 3 years full-time doing that on a government grant of £163 a year.
Peter, I've loved listening to your stories. I've been with you all the way, so thank you very much for coming this morning.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.